want to miss this opportunity. There were several questions on the chat, and some are related. So maybe if you, all the panelists, if you can put your cameras, some were related to Dr. Ananta on how, or any good practice or example from schools where the social emotional learning has been incorporated, what kind of changes have been observed. There was also a question on how can this type of education that is more inclusive and humane, that's for Scherto, and relevant be translated into something practical that can reach children, even those in the most difficult circumstances. There were some questions also in relation to the policy. So how do we take to convert this into policies when the people that need to make those changes don't really believe in this type of education? So it was one of the questions maybe for you and Therese. And I think here there was a question also for Dr. Abu Nimer, who had to leave in this moment, but I think some of you might respond to this, is that we see the also rise in the discrimination of children from certain communities, hate speech, discrimination in the schools. And of course, peace education is absolutely necessary, but sometimes the hardest challenges come precisely from inside, from our systems. So these are some of the questions. And Bino, I would say a question for you is, with experience, of course, with the community, how can we make then education more articulated also in the community from the experience? So maybe a concrete recommendation on this, how to make it happen. So I'm gonna leave 1 minute for all, and I want Emira and Stephen to think at the end of all these comments of one wish that you like education to be. What would you like education to help children and young people? So think about this, so at the end we can wrap it up. So all of you have just 1 minute to go through this question. So maybe we start with Dr. Ananta.
Games. Kids love to play, and education should be, learning should be a play. And we find that games are an extremely effective pedagogical tool, and especially games which are interactive, games that can connect students across different cultures, across spatial scales. So space does not become a constraint anymore. And you can use existing games, and you can use existing action-packed games, and in fact, sometimes even violent games that can be used in a paradoxical, counterintuitive way to think about the impacts of violence, the impacts of how a lack of empathy impacts in terms of how one thinks about the perspective from the different perspectives. So it's interesting when you use a game like, there's one which I find fascinating called The War of Mine. And it really is a fast action pace for the young players here. I hope they play games. The AAA, it's of a AAA game quality. So it's got graphics, it gets people excited. And you know, they have found that when a child reaches a certain level and achievement, the feel-good neurotransmitters, this huge rush of dopamines, serotonin. Can you imagine doing that when you're learning, rather than actually having the opposite of being bored is a chore, and using games as an assessment? So if you go to the next level, means you have learned. And it's an exciting, you're playing with the others. We have tried this, where then we take the person out of the game and have a discussion about, what did you learn from that? What did you learn about that first shooter game? What did it achieve? And so I find that games, maybe I'm a bit biased because I like to play games all the time. So this is an excuse that I use at UNESCO, that we are actually working, but we play. We used to have, before COVID, every Friday we have lunch, and then we play games till we finish work. And what we do is we play, you know, some of the staff will recommend 2-3 games, and then we'll play the games, and then to see how we can convert this into a learning module. And so on our own platform, it's called Framer Space. And if you go there, we have games. There's one on migration. There's one on art appreciation, but you learn about gender. You know, what it means to be of a different gender. So it's great with the boys. You know, what does it mean to be a woman or a girl? What are the traumas that they go through? And the same thing for the girls to understand about the boys as well. It's a great social mixer. It breaks all kinds of taboos. So I say games.
Thank you so much, Anant. I think that's a very good games to develop empathy. I think that's a very concrete way. In the work we do in Arigato, I think it's essential when we do this even role plays and play with children, how they manage to put themselves in the place of the other, because it kind of takes them away from their own lives to the life of other, and it opens up for them to actually speak of situations that actually are important for them. Very interesting. And Therese, you want to also share about what was said on how do we convince policymakers that this education needs to be included in curricula?
Well, honestly, I do not think it's a question of convincing policymakers, because policymakers sign conventions and they all want to be seen to be doing things. But rather what we really need to do is how do we unlearn some of those rigid and regimentary approaches to learning, to education. The teacher is bored and overburdened. The student also is bored and overburdened. And I agree again with Ananta. Really, we must bring a lot more fun into translating policy into practice. All that the policymaker wants to really understand is that this is relevant and it would lead to the kind of results. But we have not really put together mechanisms to really change how we teach teachers to teach, and how we really also encourage learners to understand that it is not a competition. I agree perfectly again that, you know, and this is something that have been tried and tested. When I was in an institution some time back, we moved away from, you know, looking at results of who came first and who came last. And we created a situation where you really compete against yourself to be in one of four categories. One that is honors, another is merit and pass or unsatisfactory. So you're telling yourself, which category do I want to belong to? And so therefore, I feel if we have to reimagine the world and the confrontations that we see, conflict all over the place, we must go back to education. I agree that at a very tender age, what you teach a child continues. And therefore, if I'm to look at the curriculum, I won't spend so much time on really investing in knowledge that young people with certain literacies, technology, digital literacy can go and find. I would rather focus more on those softer skills, those skills that can build relationship, those skills that can really ensure that they would really find inner peace and be an example to help others, like we got from the youth speaker. So basically, I really feel that it's not a question of the policy, it's about the practice and application of it. That is where we have gone wrong. We inherited a system where everything, when we say education, we think of schools. Education need not only take place in schools, and even the parents come in here. What do the parents do at home to ensure that the child does not develop certain, behavior patterns that may work against integration in a community, in a school system, or what have you. So let me keep it at that and say policy is just the aspirations. What is the problem is the practice, the application. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And that's a very good reminder. And I think we always tend to say we need more policies, we need these changes. But I think, as you said, there is already a lot already embedded in the in the systems, is how we put this into practice. And I think the training of teachers, of course, is a critical aspect to bring this into reality, as you mentioned. And so I want to, because we are very short with time, so I want to move to Scherto. Scherto, please, in terms of, so this type of education that you mentioned, how do we make it possible?
Well, I think that's often the question. It seems very philosophical, very idealistic, but I will just give you an example. So I take the A, and I mentioned ABC, but they all, in fact, the ABC all connected. I give you an example that bring these together in an inclusive environment. So cultivating an awareness of the awareness of our inner being is paramount to nurturing our spiritual well-being. Maria Lucia used to talk about, and also to social transformation. Nordic countries are very well known for their being peaceful, being high level of life standard, but also being welfare countries. Nordic country went through a transformation in the mid of 1800s. It's a collective consciousness awakening. Because at that time, those Nordic countries were in a very dire situation. Many people had migrated to North America. And so what it did was to establish folk high schools where young people come together to form an exclusive circle. It was almost like miniature learning communities. And this tradition had continued. That was the stepping stone for Nordic countries to become what they are at the moment. So that's a real foundation for social transformation. And so at our human-centered education, we actually developed a 12-week program aimed at facilitating young people's self-awareness and the awareness of their holistic well-being. It requires 90 minutes a week, or 1 hour, some people, 1 hour a week. Bring young people together so that they can experience, and Vinu says something really beautiful, learning for life, in life, through life, and throughout life. Basically gave them a chance to experience learning for learning's sake. It's a dialogic group. It features a listening, caring, experiencing each other's humanity and the empathy that Anand has talked about, and also receiving the gifts of compassion and empathy for each other, playing with each other, acting, singing, drawing, walking. Finland called this a Prometheus camp. We call it a 12-week well-being program. In this process, students experience profound self-transcendence, self-understanding, and they deepen the relationship with each other and together with the world. So this has been trial and tested, very powerful program for young people. The problem is schools often do not think these experience matter. And this is in fact, they tend to think inclusion is about just teaching student rights, teaching them about peace, teaching them things from outside themselves. But if you give young people an experience of this, being respected, being cared for, being loved, being in friendship with each other, experience the dignity by being together, that is the best approach for inclusion. So that is one practice, and that practice, Maria Lucia, as you said, depends on how we train adults and also young people to become facilitators rather than instructors. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Scherto. Vino, also your reflections. I like very much on this of diversity you built on what Professor Abu Nimer mentioned also on this interconnectedness, interdependence. And unfortunately, he had to leave, but he also brought up the role of interfaith learning, interfaith collaboration, and the role of faith communities. So maybe your last thoughts in relation to this and the experience of Shanti Ashram.
Thank you, Maria Lucia. I think it's helpful for me to have a concrete example. Shanti Ashram has a 28-year-old early childhood program called the Bala Shanti program. And our early childhood centers are called Bala Shanti Kendras, Children's Peace Centers. And I once asked my mother and the founders of this program, why do you not call it early childhood and why do you call it Bala Shanti Kendra, Children's Peace Center? She said the ultimate aim of the Balashanti Kendra is for children to understand that all of this knowledge is towards living peacefully and to creating a peaceful society. And in this center, if I may just use practical examples, we have all the formal learning of language, of math, of science, all of this. But what we have done with the community as a teacher is the complementary and the supplementary role. So for example, cultural practices in religion are taught by parents through various practical methods. Social responsibility is taught through the practice, again, very close to Mahatma Gandhi's heart, Shramadan, an age-old practice in the subcontinent of giving of physical labor. So children learn social responsibility, how to keep their schools, how to keep their society. There is also, during COVID-19, my colleagues in the Balashanti program, Deepa and the others, have started something very, very wonderful in gender equality. Cooking together, making all of that were gendered practices in community, tying of flowers, making of baskets, drawing of the beautiful rangolis, the columns, all of this has become equal activities. So to summarize, Maria Lucia, the visualization, the vision of education, I think, has to be now broadened, and we have to represent it to our society as becoming ways in which we can live peacefully and create peaceful societies. We can look at what we have, but we can add and enrich the learning spaces with the community and the families as active participants. Also, I think, just to add to what Anne has just said, not just putting the policy into practice, but finding for our children a living experience of connecting theory with practice, those praxis points, for them to see it alive, and not just in experiments that are written as practicals in books, but to see it alive. And again, I come back to this thinker of whom I have read a lot for this preparation is Hosman, who says the balance wheel of social harmony. Education can play that role of being the balancing wheel of social harmony. We have seen this in the Learning to Live Together program as well, Maria Lucia at Arigato, how children feel so empowered as leaders and agents of change. So that's a concrete example, a 28-year-old ongoing experiment in early childhood education from Shanti Ashram. Thank you, Maria Lucia.
Thank you, Vino. Very good that you have brought the early childhood, as it was also mentioned by Professor Abu Nimer, because it's in these early years where actually children learn prejudices, where children learn about the other, and it's where the family in particular and the community around becomes so important in shaping this vision of the child, of the other, of the inclusiveness. So those experiences that you shared of how the communities engage, how parents become actually the ones providing this support and sharing and creating the link also with culture and within this kind of ecosystem that you create with the Balashanti programs. I think that's a very powerful example of how actually this is lived by the children and not just taught. I think that's an excellent point. So I want to finish, and I'm not going to give recommendations or summaries of everything. I will just let Stephen and Emira to finish with their thoughts of how they would like education to be. So Emira, you want to start?
Okay. Education for now is really, really good. So I'm going to talk from formal education, so about the school. So I would like that we in education more talk about our thinking, so what we think about that lecture, what we're learning, and I think that would be much better. And children like me and older and younger recognize and learn better if they do something, like if they play a game, they learn more. So I think games and something like that is really, really good to learn. Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
That's very good. I think asking more questions to children instead of, that's I think very good point, Emira. You also mentioned when you start listening, and then you are telling us here, ask more questions to us on how if we like it, how we like it, and what you are learning. So I think this is very important, listening and asking questions and play and make it more fun. So we talk about the methodology, we talk about the role of teachers, the role of the community. We talk about values also and the central place of values-based education. We talk about the role of training of the teachers and how to equip teachers with this kind of pedagogy. We talk about holistic approaches to the child and to seeing education. We talk about this awareness that is needed for the child to develop empathy, to develop this relational aspect with the other, to develop compassion. And of course that children have spaces to develop this agency through these experiences, through education. So I think it has been a wonderful panel with very, very insightful reflections and enriching experiences. And I want to recall what Therese said at the end of her presentation, calling us to continue this collaboration and continue thinking together about the role of education. And I hope that we can join forces together also to continue this important task that we have ahead of as people working for education, with education, but also with the help and the thinking of children on the kind of education we want to see. So I want to thank all and those who were watching this live stream, and the full live stream will be available also. We will share the link, and I thank you for joining us today. Thank you so much.